Hello and welcome back, future scientists. Thank you so much for making it today. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and I have another great lesson today talking about cell transport. Okay, specifically what we're focusing on today is something called active transport. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop into it and see what we're talking about. Okay, so I wanted to compare passive transport and active transport with y'all real quick. So over here on the left is passive transport. Now, some things that we need to point out is look at the direction for these. You can see that all of this stuff is coming into the cell, okay? But what I want you to notice here is that we're going with the concentration gradient, okay? Outside of the cell, there are more solutes, and as it diffuses into the cell, it's going down the concentration gradient. Over there on the left, you're really not seeing any solutes inside the cell right here, right? All the solutes are outside of the cell. So they have a natural tendency to want to spread out. And so what happens is they just diffuse across that cell membrane. And the thing you really want to know here is that passive transport, no energy is involved, okay? So this right here, the purple is diffusion, okay? When I come over here and we're looking at the orange and the blues, this is something called facilitated diffusion. Now, I mentioned this a couple times already, but just to review this, facilitated diffusion is just like diffusion, there's just one extra thing. There's a protein channel involved. So you can see here, these molecules would be too big to move through the cell membrane like these solutes are. So they have to use a special door in order to enter the cell. That door is called a protein channel. So we're still going down the concentration gradient. There's a lot of solutes out here. There's really none down here. So they have a natural tendency, they want to go into the cell. They're a little too big to go through the cell membrane, so instead they go through the cell membrane protein channels. So facilitated diffusion has a protein channel involved with it, okay? Let's compare, all of this is passive transport. There's no energy over here. This is a little bit different. This is active transport. And what I wanted to point out here is that it's kind of the opposite. We're moving up the concentration gradient, and we're going to have to use energy in order to make that happen. So you can see here that we have a lot of these orange little diamonds, whatever solutes these are. There's a lot inside the cell already. But maybe they're really, really important, and we want as many of them as we can. Well, there's two down here. They have a tendency, these want to leave, but the cells want to bring them in. So we're moving up the concentration gradient. In order to get these two into the cell, we're going to have to use a little bit of energy. The way your cells use energy is a molecule called ATP. Okay, so anytime we're talking about using energy, try to remember the name of this molecule, ATP. That's how your cell uses energy, is in the form of this molecule. Basically what's going on is there's 3 phosphates in this molecule. It breaks one of the phosphates off and it provides a little bit of energy, okay? So what you really want to know, passive transport, no energy. Active transport, you're using energy for this. Okay, and that's kind of what it says over there on the right-hand side. Passive transport does not require energy, okay, and no energy. ATP is involved with the movement of molecules. But active transport, you have to use energy to do that. Great. So let's just look at diffusion and the concentration gradient a little bit just to kind of review this stuff. So this picture is kind of an example of diffusion. What's happening here is when you have a lot of solutes in one area, and this we have all those green circles on the left. Well, they have a natural tendency to want to spread out. That's called diffusion. In fact, humans are kind of like this too. So I want you to imagine maybe when you were coming to school today, you got on the school bus. Well, if you see an area of the bus that doesn't have anyone sitting on the seat, you're more likely to spread out and go to that seat, right? You're not going to sit where there's already 2 people there. You kind of want to spread out and get your own area. That's kind of what's going on with this diffusion too. There's a natural tendency for things just to want to spread out, okay? So that's called diffusion. Again, this is a type of passive transport. We're going from an area of high concentration to low concentration. We're going down the concentration gradient, and that means that there's no energy involved. This is just kind of going with the natural flow, okay? There are a couple different types of passive transport. So we've talked about diffusion. What we were just looking at is an example of diffusion. Let me just remind you about the facilitated diffusion. We've got a couple of pictures of facilitated diffusion over there on the right. This is diffusion. through a protein channel. So there's still no energy involved here, there's no ATP. The only difference is the molecules are a little bit bigger and they have to move through a protein channel to get into the cell. Another type of passive transport is osmosis. It's the natural movement of water. In osmosis, we move from an area of low solutes to high solutes, but that's just the natural movement of water, and so no energy is involved with that as well. Okay? To talk about that facilitated diffusion a little bit, let's remember that it is moving from an area of high concentration to low concentration, but they need some help of proteins to get into the cell membrane. That's what the word facilitate means, is to help. So this diffusion just needs a little bit of help from the protein channels because the molecules are so large. Okay? So facilitated diffusion, we're using proteins to do this. It's high to low, okay? It uses those transport proteins that I've been talking about, and this is how we're gonna transport larger or charged molecules through a channel protein. Great. Okay, so let's just look at another picture. Let's kind of break this down a little bit. We looked at a picture kind of similar to this. So up top, I've got two examples of passive transport. I have diffusion and I have facilitated diffusion. Take a second and somebody tell me what's really the only difference between diffusion and facilitated diffusion? It's the use of a That's right, it's the use of a protein, okay? That's the only difference here. We're still going down the concentration gradient, still no energy involved, okay? So the top two are both passive transports. On the bottom, this is active transport. It's the opposite, okay? We're going from an area of low concentration to high concentration. Look at that bottom picture. On the left, there's only 2 solutes. On the right, there's a lot of solutes. But we're wanting to bring those 2 inside of the cell. To make that happen, we're going to have to use a little bit of energy. The energy your cells use are called ATP, okay? It breaks off one of those phosphates. That when that bond is broken, it releases a little bit of energy. We're able to capture those molecules using the protein channel and bring it into the cell, okay? So let's talk about active transport a little bit. I just kind of talked about all the passive transport. This is active transport, okay? So what do you need to know about active transport? Well, it's really the opposite of diffusion. So here we're moving against the concentration gradient, okay? We're going from an area of low concentration to high concentration. I like to tell people that it's like going up the concentration gradient is like riding your bicycle uphill. It takes a lot more energy to do that, okay? We're going from low to high, so that's the opposite of diffusion, and we're using ATP here, okay? This is going to require a protein pump, and the protein pump is going to require energy, and the energy is in the form of ATP, okay? Great, so I'll introduce active transport and then we'll get into it more next time. Okay, so active transport, again, it's moving from low concentration to high concentration, and it does require energy. Why does it require energy? Because moving up the concentration gradient is like moving up a hill, okay? It takes more energy to ride your bicycle up a hill than down a hill, okay? There's 2 types of active transport. I'll introduce them and talk more about them next time, okay? So one form of active transport is called, we use protein pumps. That's how we're going to move small molecules. But if we have to move a lot of stuff at once, there's 2 other forms of active transport we're going to use. Those are called endocytosis and exocytosis. Today, all we really need to know, endocytosis is when you're bringing something inside of the cell, and exocytosis is when you're pushing something outside of the cell. So endo, to me, kind of sounds like indoors, so that's when we're bringing something into the cell. Exocytosis kind of sounds like the word exit a little bit. So if we're trying to get something to leave the cell, in a large quantity, we're going to do this process called exocytosis, and that's going to push that stuff outside of the cell. Okay, so that's a quick overview of passive transport versus active transport. They're kind of opposites of one another, and next time I'll get into the different forms of active transport in a little bit more detail. All right, y'all, thank you so much for following along with me today. Y'all did a great job. We've got some other assignments and some stuff we'd like you to practice this stuff on. Make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.